What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's patch 11.17 for League of Legends. This one's actually pretty big. There's a few systems updates to things like items and runes. Overall, should be a pretty interesting patch. Nothing absurdly major, but cool to look at. There's some like small rework stuff, which I guess maybe you consider really major. But let's go into it. Patch 11.17. Yes. So nerfs to Viego because of pro presence in the jungle. Graves for win rates in mid everywhere, though again, not a pro flag. That's wrong. Leona, I believe, is only a pro flag. Her win rate is fine in solo queue. Irelia definitely has still been a little bit strong, although I don't remember what the nerf is off the top of my head. Blue Kayn, again, not a pro nerf. I am kind of sad that they're getting these like bars wrong. Whatever, it's not a huge deal, but Kayn is too high win rate, and then Zed is slightly too high win rate as well, apparently, for mid elos, but then a bunch of buffs to champions that we don't really see very much of, which is pretty cool. Some adjustments to champions like Akshan and Gangplank, Amumu and Lucian, and that should all be pretty cool. Okay, and then yeah, as we see, a bunch of item changes and whatnot. Many of these are just strictly buffs, strictly nerfs, but let's get into it. All right, so Akshan, some, bug fixes and changes and whatnot, right? So you can't get revised when he's dead, some bug fixes to his abilities and whatnot. But the big thing is realistically the change to E heroic swing. What it comes down to is the base damage is going down by 20, and the AD ratio is going from 10% to 17.5% bonus attack damage. The attack speed ratio is unchanged. That's still there, but it just kind of multiplies the damage by attack speed. My nose is itching for no reason. It's weird. But the main thing is people realized, at least some people realized, that E max first Akshan is the right build because it makes him a really, really good single target assassin. Because it turns out that, having an ability that 4x's its damage when you put all the points into it, and then it resets on kill and assist, turns out that's his best skill order. No one should be surprised by this. It's actually just his best build. And you just make sure you like land a Q to get them marked, and then off you go killing enemy champions. So E's rank up is going down. My understanding is Riot wants Q max to be the at least an acceptable build, if not the optimal build. So he's more push and roam and then go gank whatnot. But yeah, all his damage is basically on this. Like, if this was a total AD ratio or something, or there's some other way to kind of like delay the scaling. But 130 with 10% bonus AD is just like, it takes 1,000 bonus AD to double the damage. This is unrealistic, right? This ability is like entirely in its base rank up, which means, it turns out he power spikes when you max the ability. So maybe there's a little bit more work that has to be done there. But anyway, unless I'm doing my math wrong, which I don't believe I am, here is the table before and after. This is obviously just like, damage per shot. Again, the attack speed ratio is a multiplier. It doesn't actually like increase the number of shots, just kind of multiplies all the damage. The base damage, obviously the AD ratio, all of which multiplied by attack speed. But yeah, down pretty substantially, right? Down 50%, which is a pretty meaningful nerf. That is a large nerf, right? For a regular ability that scales to like 250 or something. It's the same as adding removing 39 damage, I think, right? And imagine like Annie's Q loses 40 damage at max rank. Like, that's gonna feel really absurd, right? It's like, well, here's this ability losing 20 at max rank, but it fires rapidly at the same percentage. So definitely a big deal. Here's a data table. Obviously, the early ranks ability are definitely worse. 267 bonus AD is a lot. Keep in mind, you get, 5 items that aren't boots in a full build, and they have on average 60 AD on them. 5 times 60 is 300. So eventually the ultra late game version of Akshan is going to have more total damage as ability, but not until basically you're at 4 or 5 items. So realistically, this is even with the AD ratio buff, an absolute overall nerf the ability, and nerf to Akshan, who is probably doing slightly too well. And again, Emax is some part of that. Okay, next up we have a small rework to Amumu. This is kind of interesting. So I read the Reddit there before I started the video. People talking about like why can't Riot let tanks be tanky or whatever, and they're like comparing him to Sylas, where Sylas is like several hundred more health than Amumu does. And yeah, at the end of the day, like, you can get in situations where the base stats no longer quite align with the kit, and I will say that base stats aligning with the kit is maybe the least important design tenet of League of Legends. And I mean, I loved because it's the base stats, right? Like, it's something that like soothes me in my head, shiny as it is. But realistically, the read is, hey, Amumu is getting a bunch of changes. Like, he's actually good in most elos, but he's bad in like mid plat and higher into diamond, into masters, into pro play, he's unplayable, right? And so, we'll skip this for a second. The big thing is Amumu now gets 2 charges of Q. And this is the entire changes that matters. This thing is a really, 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 really big deal. The recast delay is 3 seconds, do not reduced by ability haste. Instead of it, I can cast Q and then 8 seconds later cast a second Q, or I can cast Q, 3 seconds later cast a second Q, and then, 13 seconds later, I cast a third Q, which, by the way, 13 seconds, right, is still shorter than 16. So even though the recharge rate has been slowed pretty substantially, I didn't bother doing the data table and the math in this one, but basically in almost all realistic scenarios, you are still getting your third Q faster as well. So the first one's the same, the second one's faster, and the third one's faster. And it's like, oh, it turns out it's just way more CC. That's really, really good. And so in internal playtesting, the base damage went down. But again, if you're getting the cast ability more often, do you really care about the base damage going down when you could just hit them twice? And it turns out 190 times 2 is better than 280. Who would have thought, right? So, a lot of these are nerfs, right? Like this is a nerf, this is a nerf. That's obviously not a nerf. But it's like this carries all the weight. So this is the big thing, right? And because this happened, it's like, well, now Mumu's OP. So how do they get the rest of the way there? So there's a couple things going on. We'll read the rest of the changes real quick. So again, health per level went down, armor per level went down. Okay, fine. The next thing that went on is 4 flat DPS was added to Despair. However, 0 to 0.4% max health was removed. So keep in mind, 0.4% max health, which is only at max rank of the ability, is equivalent to 4 DPS at 1,000. So once you hit rank 5 of the ability, because keep in mind it's much less than that beforehand, right? It's 0.1%, which means you need 0.1% of what is 4? 2,500? I think that doesn't seem right. Doesn't matter. We're going to skip the math because it's not, actually it would be 4,000, right? So at rank 1 it's strictly buffed, at rank 2 it's strictly buffed against basically everything except the max stack Cho'Gath, and then as time goes on it's slightly weaker against the healthier targets, whatever. Anyway, right, flat damage, early game damage added to Despair, late game nerf to the R, right? Rank 2 and rank 3, the ultimate got weaker. Technically, late game W damage went down. Right? Health growth and armor growth went down. So the big tenet that we tend to see now that I've kind of summed the abilities and everything that's happened, could have done that first, sorry for the sidetracking, is in general, it appears, and this has been true for every changes that I've actually seen and measured, that is just routinely true. Early game appears to matter more the higher elo you get. Just in general. Now, I think some of this is people being kind of defeatist and just saying, well, it's doomed, whatever, it's over, who cares, guess we lost. But some of it is people are a bit cleaner at the game. If people on your team are actually skilled and you know how to put down vision and set up Baron properly, if you have enough of a lead, it should be impossible to throw at Baron. Now, I know we've seen even pro teams throw at Baron. Of course, that happens. But it appears to be anecdotally that, indeed, better players are better at closing out games. And so the more early game skewed a champion is, the more high elo skewed it is. Example right now being Renekton, who's a 46% win rate solo queue champion, and yet still the most picked top laner in pro play. It's well, he's an early game lane bully, and so that's what's going on. And so we look at, for example, the changes we got to Sylas, a while back that has, I would say, completely solved Sylas's elo skew problems, where, yeah, the man has 115 health per level. It's really absurd. All of his abilities have really strong rank ups. His armor and MR scaling are both incredibly high. He has probably the most late game power compared to early game power in terms of number growth of any champion in League of Legends. And yet he is balanced in solo queue across basically all elos and balanced for pro play. Well, before this champion had a 42% win rate in solo queue with 100% pick ban. So it's well, when you make things late game skewed, you get to average things out. And in this case, Amumu is only good in iron through maybe gold, and then okay in plat, and then bad in diamond and unplayable in pro. And so we go the other way. We early game skew the Amumu. And so now we're finally on to the point at hand. I know we're only 2 champions in, and this has been 6 minutes on just Amumu right here. So health growth goes down, armor growth goes down. And the funny thing is, Amumu already has low health growth. I get it. This looks kind of weird. But where are they going to pull power from, right? And it's well, they could have maybe pulled more power from Despair and, made it even worse of a rank up. They already pulled this out of the ultimate. They already pulled a lot of rank up damage out of the queue. Right, it's down 10 to down 90. Like, how much more can you really pull out of this ability? The charge cooldown goes from 10 to 8 to 16 to 14. Percentage-wise, it's like so much weaker, right? Like, everywhere they could have, they nerfed the late game if they could, and then buffed the early game to some degree, and then, gave him some gameplay around the Q. The one fun thing I'm going to say about this on the theoretical level, is note the CC duration. To my recollection, a Bandage Toss is a 1 second stun, followed by 1.5 for Curse the Sad Mummy. So now at 2.5 seconds, and your opponents always have half a second to flash or something before being chain stunned by the Amumu Q. Right, was very intentional in saying, hey, by the way, you cannot, in fact, do 3.5 seconds of chain stun. This is not allowed. And it's like, I get that. That's totally reasonable to do. And it's why this cooldown between casts is not reduced by ability haste. Otherwise, you'd hit like 50, 25 ability haste, something like 25 ability haste. And now you chain stun for 3.5. That's a little abusive. Totally understandable. Anyway, here are the numbers. So here's Amumu's health before and after. Yes, it's quite low. A melee champion below 2k is certainly quite low. Yep, indeed, I understand that. Now it's below 1900, which is very, very low. Yep, that's the world he lives in. Oh, well, too bad. Here is this multiplied against his total armor. I will say 3.8 or 3.5 are not terribly high for melee. They're not terribly bad, but it's not above average at the very least. Overall, physical durability can tank instead of 3,800, 3,500 total damage, which, like, it matters, right? It's 7% less damage taken before he has to die, but you will, of course, always soften these with buying health and buying armor because, of course, he's going to go Iceborne Gauntlet or something like that, and it's going to be okay. Here's Amu's Q damage. This is, by the way, what I believe the actual skill order is going to be, which is maxing at second, which is his most common build right now, and maxing at third, which is going to be his most common build afterwards, because I believe the rank of incentive is too poor to be worth it otherwise. There's a chance I'm wrong, but I think the rank of incentive is really, really bad. So here's the Q damage before and after. Now keep in mind, even up to level 9, getting 2 Qs is going to be more damage. But also, now I will say that building AP Amumu so far has been incorrect. If you look at his solo Q win rate data, his tank builds are like, if you just look at first item, you say, first item Sunfire or first item Iceborne versus first item like Night Harvester or like Leandries or whatever, it is a 5% win rate gap. It is really, 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 really bad. AP Amumu is basically unplayed. So the nice thing is they did buff this AP ratio. They buffed it pretty meaningfully. And so I said, okay, a default AP build is probably going to be about 15 AP per level. Around level 9, you're at 135, which is like Mythic plus a couple of stacks and a Dark Seal or something like that. Like, that's kind of reasonable. 278 level 18 is like, it's, 3 items if you're not going Death Cap. Like, that's pretty reasonable. So this is my general, like, guesstimate for what it's going to look like. This is going to be roughly accurate. And so we see that, once you get enough ability power, indeed the AP ratio buff matters. And until you start putting more points into the old Q, you can in fact leave Q as a 1-point wonder and just get some ability power, and you will beat the old ability, right? So if you ever are playing 1-point wonder Amumu, like, actually, the AP ratio is actually quite good on this one. Worth noting, this is a very generous AP ratio in general. It's 200 and change, well under 300 to double the damage of this ability. So it's a very aggressive AP ratio. But again, Amumu's AP builds are bad, so it makes sense to do such. All right, so next up we have Amumu's W damage. This is if we're actually maxing it last in both cases. In a case we really are going Q second, which I know again, we're not revealing here, but whatever, right? If you really aren't thinking about it and you're just going to max W last anyway, well, it's better for like the entire game. Now, our example target here is not everyone's example target. This is 585 plus 85 health per level. For reference, like we did the numbers off screen. It goes up to like 2100 health at level 18, something like that, roughly around there. So it's most mages and bot laners and non-tank supports. So it's 3/5 the enemy team in most cases, against a fighter or like a heavy fighter, someone who's going to build like a Titanic or something, or a Divine Sunderer, or a tank. This is going to be more of a nerf than it looks like, or less of a buff than it looks like. But you can see for a large portion of the game, obviously, the first 13 levels of the ability, by the way, it's just strictly 5 more damage. Like, there is no change to the first 13 levels of this champion if you're maxing W last. It's just plus 4 damage per second, which, hey, helps your jungle clear speed, which is going to be meaningful, right? Because clear speed matters, of course, for junglers a lot. But this is going to be quite meaningful. This should actually move the needle a fair bit for him. And obviously, your PvP damage is up quite a bit, to the tune of, again, 20%, which is not trivial either. And then, eventually, as you, lose, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% max health per second. Eventually, yeah, when they have 2000 HP, that's 8 DPS lost for 4 DPS gained, and oh, lo and behold, here we go, we're down some DPS. Even if you're gonna change the order, and this is a little bit funky, right? Because again, in the old version of Amumu, you did in fact max W last. So let's be clear, right? In the real world, post-patch, you're gonna have this comparison on Q, okay, which is like, yeah, my Q does a lot less damage in the mid game. Absolutely, right? I'm losing, in some cases, literally 200 damage off my Q. Now I get a second Q, and I'm going to get some of it back, but I'm going to lose this at level 13. In the real world, you're probably going to max W second in the new version, which means at level 13, you're getting 29 more DPS. It's like, well, 29 DPS is pretty big. I mean, again, that's going to require 10 seconds of crying on them to make that up, right? To be clear, but still, this is what you're getting. I am pretty sure that you're going to max W second. I'm pretty sure it's correct. Either way, again, you're getting much more CC, and that matters. I mean, with stun duration, again, worst level 11 through 18. Yes, indeed. Down a quarter second, down a half second, that's going to matter. I still believe that this is the goal, and Riot they'll upkeep of the champion, right? If the win rate ends up in a bad spot, they'll buff. If it ends up in too good of a spot, they'll nerf. It'll probably end up being within bounds. But yeah, it's a bunch of seemingly nerfs for the fact that you get to throw out 2 Qs, and that should be a really big deal. There's always a chance we get it wrong. We'll see what happens, but it's a cool change at the very least, and they'll follow up if they have to. Next up, now that we are 50 minutes talking about just one champion, we're going to talk about Ekko. So Ekko's interesting because he is played more in the jungle than in mid lane, and however, at jungle, Ekko is doing worse in terms of power. Yeah, so Ekko, I actually looked at it pretty recently. I think it's like 55-45 in terms of jungle versus mid pick rate. I find it very odd. So I've seen this several times now on Reddit. I'm gonna call it out again because I think it's really silly. People make claims that aren't supported by reality, which is just weird. But I mean, I don't think anyone's surprised in our day and age. People are making claims without any support by evidence from reality. So the comment I saw, and it was like an upvoted chain, was like, here's Riot, shoving another champion into the jungle who doesn't deserve to be there. So Ekko's win rate is currently very good in mid lane. Same with Diana, by the way. Ekko and Diana, for example, as our examples here, are very strong in mid lane. It is their highest win rate role for both of them. And the pick rates are not trivial. They are strong in those roles. However, in the case of Jungle Diana was a pro play problem and maybe a high elo pick ban problem. And Jungle Ekko here is a champion that clearly people like playing. He's not objectively OP. They just want to play Jungle Ekko. And Riot's like, well, we can make Jungle Ekko not garbage. We could buff him and make him a stronger champion because he's at a 48% win rate. So sure, we can just buff Jungle Ekko. That's fine. Let's just make the champion balanced. And Reddit's like, I can't believe Riot's shoehorning Ekko into the jungle when he's supposed to be a mid laner. It's like, he is a mid laner. Play him. What is wrong with you? Anyway, small buff to the Ekko passive. I don't believe my math is out. I'm not sure why. I guess, yeah. It's tough to math out because it's... Guess what? The numbers are 1/3 higher. And you can't really do a great DPS comparison compared to his entire kit just because there's a cooldown and it's just awkward. So 33% stronger. He's going to jungle better. Good job, Ekko. Next up, Evelynn. Another simple change. 20 to 0 seconds off the ult cooldown. Great. I will say, basically any champion with an ult cooldown longer than 120 feels really sluggish. Some cases you really have to, things like Crowstorm are really abusive, and I think it's 130 anyway. It's not even that short or that long. But as someone who's played Evelynn a little bit, you really felt this 140, and so I mean this should feel a lot better for Evelynn players, which is good. Next up is Gangplank. Gangplank's getting a whole bunch of early game nerfs, so we are kind of moving slightly towards the pro play patches. I believe 11-18. I believe is the world's patch. I could be wrong about that, but it's 18, maybe 19. It's 18 or 19. It's almost, I'm 99% certain it's 18 or 19. So we are moving towards worlds pretty soon, right? So that's what we're gonna be looking at pretty soon is getting champs into an interesting spot for pro play. And so Gangplank is one of the champions that is picked as an early game lane bully, and it's actually a champion where he's, because of his pro presence, is going to have to start, he's going to start losing win rate because of pro nerfs, and it's going to make actual Gangplank players in solo queue really sad because he's abusing his early game lane power. So it's a bunch of early game nerfs, right? Less move speed on the passive. Here you go. And I'm going to choose level 6 and 11 for boots upgrades. Here's rank 1 boots, here's rank 2 boots, but again, it's just percentage change, so it doesn't affect these numbers here, but in terms of how fast he actually walks, here you go. Um, okay, cool. Yep, pretty moderate nerf in the early game. Definitely walking quite a bit slower, but whatever. Next up, Parlay now counts as a ranged basic attack because of Grasp of the Undying. Now, one could make an argument that Gangplank being melee and getting to like abused ranged mechanics as melee is an interesting thing for Gangplank. However, that said, he is hard bound to Grasp and doesn't have any other options. Um, in general, I believe that feeling clever only holds weight for so long. Like I think if I could like travel back through time and look at Gangplank here through the eyes of like this Q change, I'd be like, yeah. While people are deciding between Grasp and Klepto, and by the way, Grasp was always correct, Klepto was always wrong. Um, Through the eyes of that, it's like, hey, let people be clever and figure out that Grasp Gangplank is good, and then nerf it 6 months later. Like, I don't think, leave it around for 3 years or 2 years or whatever. But like, okay, once people have realized, oh, there's actually only one keystone choice. Okay, look at the interactions again. And I think that's worth looking at. That if there's a way that Riot can look like, hey, what are the champions where they're 95% bound to a keystone? I don't actually know what Gangplank's bound is. Like, I don't know if it's 90%, 95, 85, what. But like, hey, who are the top 3 most keystone bound champions? Can we change that in some way? Because clearly there's no choice anymore for players. And you find the number you're happy with, right? Like, Riot has this automated data report for, what champions are OP in Pro with 90% presence across one patch or 80% across 2 patches. What champs are OP in Challenger? It's, whatever the like 65% pick ban rate or whatever it is. What champs are OP in Plat Plus or bronze through gold or whatever. Oh, it's 53.5% win rate, whatever. Like that's all interesting. I think that's actually that's cool. I like that because it says, hey, by the way, we're gonna put up some guardrails, and if it goes beyond these guardrails, we're gonna do something about it. Like I think that's great. I think that's really smart. I wonder if it wouldn't be too hard to do something like that for Keystones. Maybe the actual design work there is really tough. I don't know, but it's a thought. Anyway, moving forward, yeah. So, removing some of the hard bound off of parlay. So let's talk about this next. So here is Gangplank Q grasp damage, and it's down pretty meaningfully, right? So grasp does 4% of your max health to your target, and so right, just saying, hey, counts as a range basic attack is actually, hey, your Q does 8% less damage. That's, I mean, that's pretty meaningful. And keep in mind that every time he triggers Grasp, he gets 5 more max health, which increases the damage by zero point 0.2, I think. Yeah. Every 5 grasps adds 1 more damage. And instead of adding 5 damage for 5 HP, it'll add 3 HP. So, okay, it's, a bit less than that, right? So instead of 4% max health damage for melee, it's 2.4% max health for ranged. Obviously, instead of stacking up 5 health per stack. So here's the other half of it, by the way. So again, the damage is down by, 8% roughly. Here's the other part of it, which is how much he's healing by, right? So the damage is down by like 10-ish, and then eventually goes down by, 25 or so later on in the game. Okay. Here is, hey, instead of healing for 2% of your max health, you're going to heal for 1.2% of your max health. Also, instead of gaining 5 max HP, you're going to gain 3 max HP. Yeah, the numbers are obviously 60%. There's not a surprise here, but like, oh, yeah, he's dealing 10 less damage and healing for 7 less health. Some of that is permanent. Wow, these Q trades are doing 17 less. That's really big for level 1. Like, this is a really big deal. This should do a lot for his lane bowling. This is very, 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 very meaningful. Next up is, okay, we can push Gangplank off of the Bruiser builds, right? Most pro play is doing Bruiser build. Now, I think in general, pros are dumb, and they shouldn't be doing Bruiser build. I think there was a time and place to go Divine Thunder or Sterix because, we went through the draft, I'm winning my lane, but, our Rakan is getting blown up. Like, we didn't know what the rest of the draft was going to look like, and we actually need me to frontline a little bit, so I have to go Bruiser because I just, the Kai's jumping on me, or I'm getting Nautilus on, or Nocturned, or whatever. It's like, okay, I got to go Bruiser. Once in a while that's going to be required out of you as a Gangplank player. I get that. However, the better builds, the stronger builds, the winninger builds are all the high damage ones. So what's nice is if Riot can keep the high damage builds afloat, it's a Gangplank, it's a ocean pun, get it? Anyway, if they can keep the high damage builds afloat, not only does that kind of remove even more of the sort of flexible pro play incentive, whatever, but also keeps Gangplank in a decent spot. So, oh, cool. Better crit damage effectiveness. That's kind of fun. So I can go Essence Reaver and Shield Bow or Gale Force and IE, and we're going to go that way. Cool, great. I also got more max barrels. This is exciting. I'm always a fan. I think it's totally reasonable to do this sort of like non-linear 3, 3, 4, 4, 5 scaling. I think it's actually a good thing. In general, the rank up is getting worse for the cooldown's sake, but much like with Amumu, think about it, right? I can get 5 barrels out really quickly, and then, well, I'm getting my 6th barrel at 14 seconds. You're getting your 6th barrel at 30. I'm getting my 7th barrel at 32 seconds. You're getting your 7th barrel at 40. I'm getting my 8th barrel at 70 seconds. You're getting your 8th barrel at 80, right? So, okay, at 8 barrels, it's the same. Before then, it's always better. It's like, well, turns out it's a pretty good buff. I mean, technically, rank 2 the ability is strictly worse, right? 3 max stacks, 16 versus 17. Okay, cool, you can split hairs there, but realistically, yeah, this is a strict buff to Powder Keg. Obviously, this is a strict nerf. This is a strict nerf. We'll see if he's still Keystone bound. It'll take some time for people to learn. It'll take a while to get all the data. Generally speaking, people are slow to adapt Keystone choices. You're just not going to have enough to look at to know for sure if he's got a better choice. But okay, even if there's just like some more options, there are some games where it's worth going elsewhere. Good job. Okay. Next up is a nerf to Graves. Lane Graves has been really, really, really far too strong. So the mana cost goes up by a simple 20. Not a big deal here, but it's a very simple buff. Or, yes, a very simple nerf, I should say. Now, it's interesting, as someone who is maining a lot of jungle over the last few months, some junglers in the jungle and some don't. So I know for a fact that Nocturne physically cannot while clearing the jungle. It's just not possible. Whereas someone like Hecarim actually can. Graves, I've played him maybe a dozen or so times over the last month. Pretty much can't run out of mana either. So this shouldn't really hurt his jungle clear almost at all. Obviously, still junglers have to team fight. Junglers can run out of mana. If you can't get back to the river or to a jungle to get your mana back, like you can run out when you're like sieging the base or something. You're like, oh, I'm not really useful anymore. This can be felt there, but it's going to be felt a lot more for top lane, mid lane Graves, who are objectively overpowered. So a good nerf to see for sure, and cool beans. Next up is Irelia. This is the Irelia nerf. Doing a little bit too well in a lot of solo queue brackets. I think mostly lower elo brackets. She appears to be slightly low elo skewed. So that means they could honestly, I think they should try to attack skew whenever possible. And if she's only too good in bronze through gold, they should have gone after 5 health per level or something, because they know scaling stats are low elo skewed. And so, I think it'd be fine for them to flatten the skew personally. But, whatever. This is not a bad nerf either. Basically, she's sustaining more so that she can be punished in weak lanes. Okay, cool. Overall, less healing. It's going to be interesting because So here's some fun math I did. I think it was actually worth doing. So this is just the amount of health difference before. This is just her, because it's percent of total AD, right? She heals for percent of total AD. So here's how much she heals per Q, just from base stats before and after. Obviously, she's going to build things like a Gore Drinker or Trinity Force or Sunderer, Wit's End. All these things have attack damage on them. Ruin King is a big one that has attack damage on it, 40. So those all matter as well. But the percentages won't change. This is still going to be the same numbers no matter what her build is. It's going to be this much less healing. For just the Q, right? And so, yeah, fairly meaningful. This is going to take it down an amount that matters. But this is not only the story of a girl, Irelia, obviously, but this is, okay, what if she's really spamming and she's going to Q 12 or 6 minions out of every single wave? And it's what is your actual health per minute regen using her Q and her base HP 5. So looking at her actual champion's health regen, and then also using her Q spam and saying, look, if you're going to spam Qs, right? If you're actually doing, you're last hitting 12 minions, you're getting basically every single minion of every single wave, your regen's down by this much. And it's like, oh, her regen's down by about 15% in the really early game. Is that a meaningful number? Yeah, it is, kind of. If you're buying a Doran Shield, it's of course even softer and whatnot. But, even though the numbers can look, pretty big, like, wow, 12 became 8, that's 1/3 off. It's like, well, but it's not that much of her overall healing budget, right? 16% becomes, 33% off. Like, half of it is actually just from base health regen, which is fine. I think it's reasonable. This regen strength clue, not a lie. This is very high regen, if you're going to use Q for it, indeed. But, okay, there you go, right? There's just the numbers on that. Next up is Kayn. So for those who don't know, when you're blue Kayn, you just all of your damage dealt deals bonus damage to magic damage. So Blue Kayn's overshadowing, especially with the Gore Drinker build. So just, hey, overall, you're going to do less damage, which it has some kind of interesting incentives, right? So obviously, they're reducing Assassin Kayn's damage to encourage him to build more offensively in order to reap his enemies. That may indeed work. There's two thoughts to it. I'm going to trust that they're right, but I'm going to explain both sides. Okay, so what if this is actually an incorrect change? It's like, well, I have a smaller damage amp, so why even bother building damage? I'll just be tanky. That said, though, if you're going to just be tanky, why play Blue Kayn? Is either half of it, right? Because the worse this gets, the less reason you have to play Blue Kayn and just be a bruiser. Because at that point, just have a knock up on your W. So the way this works, by the way, is obviously you can't get like the low level versions because you don't get Blue Kayn at level 1 in any game ever. But the way it works is a percentage of just your damage to champions post mitigation is then dealt again as magic damage. Which means, by the way, that even though it's Blue Kayn and he has a bunch of magic damage, armor is still an effective stat because armor still affects this damage. Which, by the way, I want to be clear, I think is the correct way to design this ability. Like, okay, the passive magic damage, whatever. Like, that feels more flavor to me than anything. But the fact that it respects the opponent's buying armor and respects him buying lethality and him buying armor pen and having a black cleave and things like that to me is very much correctly designed. So I'm like really happy about sort of the mechanics of this one. That's a good job by the designer who built Kayn. IMO, but yeah. So anyway. It affects all damage, right? It has a duration, it can time out, it gets reset when you ult, but this affects your W damage, affects your Q damage, affects your auto attacks, affects your ult itself if you get it off fast enough. This is like it's a global damage amp. Now, just for funsies though, I said, well, these percentages are going to always be the same. Like it's always going to be 4 to 10% less damage output. And then keep in mind that the magic damage itself is going to then be reduced by MR. So it's going to be even less than this because, everyone's going to have like 40, 50 MR. So, cut that down by 25 to 30% or so, even more against like raw tanks. And look, it's not that big of a nerf. Like realistically, it's not that big of a nerf. But I mean, if this was a global 8% less damage to the champion, that would be absurd. So, it's not that. But anyway, this is just using his base AD as our example damage, and realistically, again, like the first like 5 levels definitely won't count. Like these numbers don't exist. I'm not even sure exactly when you expand, but not that early. So yeah, what it comes down to is it's a moderate nerf, right? Should nerf Blue Kayn, should be pretty meaningful. Okay. Next up is Leona. Leona is losing 5 armor and MR off of her W. There's also a like flat damage reduction that goes through as well. To my understanding, that kind of stuff is usually post armor MR, so it's gonna kind of feed into itself. It's both a smaller and bigger nerf than you think because again, there's more going on with the ability. It deals some damage, it has flat damage amp, but again, the flat damage amp itself feeds off of her armor MR, so there's something there on both sides of it. But either way, losing 5 armor and 5 MR. Here's her overall durability as a result of these changes. So we get max W first. It is 3 to 2% less physical durability, and 3.3 to 2.6% less magic durability. Is it massive? No. It's only during the W, but hey, it's going to be on a lot of the time. Nerf matters. But yeah, she's a big deal in pro, so okay. Next up is Lissandra. Lissandra gets 2 AD, and she gets 5 mana cost off the Q. Pretty simple changes, but here's the data tables. Helping with last hitting. I'm generally a fan. Like my idea, without really like giving it a lot of extra thought, is right, you gotta have every single champion, every ranged champion, hit exactly 100 AD at level 18 and 1.0 attacks per second level 18. And basically using base attack speed ratios as the like big like base attack speed and attack speed ratios as like the big like how good of an auto attacker are you. There's not a lot of that given into that one. I think there's a lot of room for that to not be correct. We have champions like Draven and Callisto who just like need really raw, like really high raw AD, it feels like. Because that has its own effects in terms of like making a BS or power spike not so punishing. So it's not that realistic. But I will say for mages, for non-auto attackers, I think non-auto attackers should get to 100 AD level 18. And just find a level 1 number you care about and then just, get to a level 18 number and be like, yeah, you're gonna hit 100 every time. Because I think it's reasonable for like Veigar and Lissandra and whoever else just to hit at 100. I think again, marksmen are probably different, whatever. Obviously fighters are different, whatever. But I don't know. I think it's fine for everyone to hit 100. Outside of like really extreme situations, like say Janna, who just gets basically free AD from her movement speed conversion. Anyway, minor thing, doesn't really matter, but it's a random thought I had. Maybe it's not good. But yep, small AD buff. Okay, great. Small mana cost buff as well. 5 flat mana. Generally going to be felt. It is kind of early game skewed in a sense, which makes it a little bit pro skewed, but also mana cost constraints are often, non-pro focused, so we'll see which way it goes. But smallest Lissandra, I think she's actually totally playable. She's in a fine spot. This feels like a pro-focused buff. But I guess they're saying that Herald numbers are pretty mediocre across the board, even in good matchups. So, okay, sure. Let's go for it. Okay, so here's the second big set of changes. We had one for Amumu, we have one for Lucian now as well. Okay, so Lucian is losing 2 base AD. Okay. He's getting a new passive, where ally buffs empower Lucian's next 2 basic attacks, which would be the main hand and offhand shots, to deal 14 plus 10% total AD magic damage as bonus. Lucian can have 4 of these stacks at a time, so he can, double shot and then E double shot and get 4 off right away. Ardent Blaze gets cheaper, but worth noting that if someone else tags your Ardent Blaze target, so basically in any team fight ever, you're getting a bunch of damage through Light Slinger. Okay, so that is quite a lot of damage. It's generally going to make up for the 2 AD. Okay, but what's going on next? Well, the culling is getting very changed. So the number of shots is now going to scale with crit chance. I assume the 22 is being multiplied by crit chance, meaning at max crit chance, the 22 becomes 44. And every 20% crit chance adds, 4.4 shots. On we go. Okay. That's happening. Also, the damage per shot is going down pretty meaningfully, right? It's going down to 3/4 of what it was before. 15 from 20, 45 from 60. Now, the raw AD ratio hasn't changed, but the base damage has gone down, which means that the more AD you have, the slightly less this matters. But it also means that technically the rank up is less valuable, because instead of getting 20 damage per shot per rank up, you're getting 15 damage per shot per rank up. And instead of getting 6 shots per rank up, you're getting no extra shots per rank up. So they are essentially trying to buff bot Lucian and nerf mid Lucian, because Lucian's another champion. He's kind of the inverse of Amumu, where his win rate is absolute trash in solo queue because mid Lucian's really good in pro and is getting played a lot in solo queue, especially in high elo as well, and is just crushing his win rate. And so if they can get mid Lucian out and give him back to bot laners, then he can have an acceptable win rate and be a playable champion for the first time in several years. And so what are we looking at? Again, 2 base AD, and the R is not scaling off of ranks almost at all. It scales off of gold. It scales off of gold. And then to make up some of the damage loss, you have a W rank up, or not W rank up, but a passive that gives you a bunch of damage. If you can, have a teammate trigger W, or buff you in a certain way. Now, the measurement for this, for being buffed by an ally, is does it apply Airy? So if Nami casts E on you, if Rakan shields you, all of that works. My understanding right now is Jarvan's flag also works. At least last we saw, Jarvan's flag seems to trigger Airy, so Jarvan Lucian is totally a thing, and that's a thing. We'll see how that one goes. Maybe that's going to be an abusive lane. Who knows? My understanding is Jarvan works. I haven't tested it myself. But this is a lot of extra damage. So let's go into the math itself. Okay, so here is Lucian's base AD before and after. Hey, look, it's 100. It's the same. Look, it's the same AD. I think this is totally reasonable. Whatever. It's totally not that important. But we have actually one minor thing I want to bring up. So it's interesting because we clearly have a mid versus bot skew for Lucian, right? But we also have a pro play skew for Lucian. And these things are at odds with one another, right? This is where it gets kind of interesting with design. Because if we're saying, hey, Lucian has a pro play skew problem, like, oh, we can lower his base stats and raise his stats per level, which I think is reasonable. Like, that's an okay thing to do, right? Like, lower his base AD to 60, raise his AD per level to like 2.9 or something, and he goes up to like, 110 base AD, starts at 60 instead of 64. Like, okay, we made some movement, We've fixed with the pro play skew because he's less of an early game bully, right? You get your break even around like level 10 or whatever. Who cares? I'm making up numbers. But the other part of it is, well, but he also has a mid lane skew problem, which means levels are actually also making him. It's like, wait, but levels are a solo queue thing. Wait, and then you're like, wait, these things are fighting each other. Which one's better? And so, you don't get to do like the simple, like, we'll just change the base stats, which I think is actually, in a lot of cases, pretty elegant. I think changing base stats can be a completely acceptable, way to solve these problems. In this case, it's like, well, crap. It's a pro play and a mid lane problem. We have to get them both out of the way. Okay. So it's a different thing, right? So, okay. Anyway, that's the damage difference to the base AD. Here is the damage with the passive on, right? So obviously my shots do 64 damage. Now my shots do 82 to 125. It's like, oh boy. Like, this is a lot. Like, realistically, let's be clear. Level 1, Nami Lucian. Nami learns E, Lucian learns E. He just dashes in and just attacks you 4 times. That is so much damage. Like, this has got to be pretty dumb. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is gonna be real dumb. I think. I think this is gonna be real stupid. Just saying, try some Nami Lucian games. It's maybe busted. Find you a duo partner, play some games. You're gonna kill some people. I'm pretty sure about this one. But it also means like, hey, Lucian really likes Lee Sin jungle if he's gonna, play mid lane still. This is a lot of damage. This is really meaningful. Now, I want to be clear though, right? One buff buffs 2 attacks. So Nami presses E, he gets 2 attacks off. He gets, 2, he gets to do the E double shot, and then it's gone, right? Okay, once Nami's level 2, all right, she can E, then W. Now you can get 4 shots off, right? Now you can E double shot, Q, hope you can still double shot. With the Nami slow, it's probably possible. With Janna, she casts 1 shield. She presses E once, and that's it. With Leona, doesn't have it. He has to land W. You have to learn Ardent Blaze. What's nice is as soon as you do land Ardent Blaze, when it damages a marked target, and I don't remember if Ardent Blaze works on minions or not. I truly don't remember. It might only mark champions. I know it damages minions, but it might only mark champions. I don't remember for sure. But okay, now Leona goes in. You get the W off. Now every auto attack that Leona lands gives you 2 passive stacks. But that takes a while, right? And this means that Lucian probably has enchanter bias. He probably really wants to be with like a Nami or a Yuumi would work pretty well. I don't know if Shirelia's triggers Aerie. I'm not sure. But I know Mikhail's does. I'm pretty confident. But this kind of stuff's going on. One thing I saw brought up in the Reddit thread, Font of Life does not count. Font of Life does not trigger Aerie. It is not you affect your teammate in some way. It has to, again, be somewhat more intentional than that. Again, Jarvan Flag might just be like the abuse case. Whatever. Okay, so we talked about the passive. We talked about the AD. We talked about the W. That's where we're going so far. Now we have the ult. And actually, I went a little above and beyond. I did a lot of math for this. Okay, so here is just the Lucian number of shots. And here's how much crit it takes to equal out. It's like, well, you need your first item plus Cloak of Agility to get the number of shots back. For rank 2 of the ultimate, obviously rank 1 is identical. So like if you get a Cloak of Agility ever, it's strictly better, by the way. Once you have rank 3 of the ultimate, you need 60% crit chance to get the number of shots back. Is it realistic to get 3 crit items by level 16? Yes, of course it is. So, for the most part, Lucian's gonna have no problems with number of shots. This is absolutely gonna be fine. And this is intentional. Riot wants to raise his win rate, right? Lucian has a very bad win rate. They want to buff the champion. So, okay. Yes, they want to buff the champion. So here, right, the passive damage is really high. It's meant to be very strong. It's meant to make the champion stronger. Hey, we have this ultimate. Look, it's not that hard to get enough crit chance to get the number of shots equal. Okay, but wait, right, there's one more thing, which is what about the rank up? Right? What about the damage, the fact that the base damage of the ability is lower? So here is the base damage of Lucian's culling, pre-patch. Here it is post-patch with no items. Wow, these numbers are really, really, really low, right? This is much, 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 much worse. Okay, well, counting the base damage as well, how much crit chance do I need? Oh, well, it turns out Cloak of Agility is basically flat, but if I finish a Mythic or, whatever, or Essence Reaver, it's better, right? If I get a Cloak of Agility by level 6, it's basically the same ability. It's close, right? We need 17% crit chance, we get 15. It's basically the same number, right? So, okay, barely a nerf if we get a Cloak of Agility by 6. Fine. All right, what about rank 2 the ultimate? Okay, well, now you need 2 items and a cloak. That's kind of tough for 11. That feels like that's not quite on pace. It's definitely not on pace for mid lane, right? Because mid lane Lucian is going to be 2-3 levels above bot lane Lucian. Mid lane Lucian is not hitting this in time. Bot lane Lucian, right, needs to be at Kraken Slayer plus Essence Reaver plus Cloak of Agility. I mean, that's possible. It's not happening for mid, but it might happen for bot. And then we get the max rank of the ultimate, right? Level 16, where, just to get the number of shots equal, it's 55% crit. Because the base damage went down by 15 per shot, we need even more going on here. So we need basically full build, right? We need to be on 4, almost 5 items. Now, there's an asterisk here. There's an asterisk here because we haven't done the whole math yet. Because once again, we have to look at the fact that the base damage went down, but the AD ratio did not. So the more AD we buy, the less this nerf matters. So this graph is still, or this chart, this data table, I should say, this is actually not accurate to a real game. Because Lucian, in fact, buys raw AD. So here we have some example builds. Okay, what if we're actually just rushing Noon Quiver? It's like, well, okay, if we're on Noon Quiver, we're not quite as good, which we knew, right? We knew without a cloak we're not quite as good. So okay, level 8, cloak plus Noon Quiver, right? We're down 3% damage. Are we down damage? Yes, we are. But then we go to Kraken Slayer, and now we're better again. And we're better by more than we were worse at Noon Quiver. Well, okay, at cloak plus Noon Quiver. So once we get a Kraken Slayer, once we hit a crit mythic, we've been buffed. But then, ooh, sorry, we hit rank 2. We hit rank 2 of the ultimate, and it's worse. Even with a cloak, it's still worse. We get all the way to Lord Dominic's. We get ranked to the ultimate with Lord Dominic's, right? We're here. Yeah, right? It's not quite as good. But we get the cloak on, we get a 55% crit chance, bam, right? It's better. We get to our second item. This could be anything, really. Like, it could be Lord Dominic's, it could be Essence Reaver. It doesn't really matter what it is. Just like some item with AD and crit is all we're looking at. And that's what we hit here. So we got there. And then we say, okay, bam, next power spike. We get Infinity by level 15, let's say. And, getting 3 items to 15 seems reasonable. I don't believe the ult has a crit damage ratio that, like, IE gives even more shots. I don't believe that's true. But there's always a chance I'm wrong, obviously. And then, okay, if we don't get any more items, then off we go. Gonna look at one final thing. One sec. All right, one final update. Added a cloak as an option build here, and the DPS is back to almost equal. So you can kind of see, right? This lines up pretty well with a crit build. Now, I don't know exactly when that is supposed to come online. Like, I could be slightly over or underestimating, but you can see the numbers really rapidly approach, between 110 and 90%, right? So this looks just tragic, right? This looks horrible, but pretty much any realistic crit build is pretty close to flat. And again, if Lucian needs buffs, Riot will buff the champion afterwards, but we are pretty close. Right, like this was mathed out clearly by the designers. They said, "Hey, what are the example builds? How close do we get? How's it going to go? Oh, this actually works out pretty well, right? Like these numbers are clearly not far apart. And again, this is where it is, right? So pretty flat on the ultimate. Unless you're doing a lethality build. If you're doing a lethality build, you're getting really, 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 really screwed because you're doing so much less damage. So much less damage. But because you can get 90%, 100% crit chance, and you can get more than the other builds are going to be, yeah, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. Okay, Nami gets 15 base health and 0 to 20 mana off the W. I want to point out Nami has very, very high armor growth. Just kind of uniquely, most enchanters don't have as much as she does, but she has like 99 armor at level 18. It's 4 armor growth. It's more than Amumu. Again, I would prefer these kinds of stats be in health than, randomly absurdly high armor. It doesn't matter very much. It's not a very big deal. Just, again, I like to constrain things that aren't important and then let the differences be in places that do matter, because Nami is randomly just good against AD. She's just like actually good against Talon because her base armor is high. So she's just good against lethality builds. She's just better at surviving Talon than other enchanters on a base stat level. And it's not like they wanted Nami specifically to be good against Talon but not good against Fizz. It just ended up being that way. And again, it's not terribly important, but I just bring it up when I see it because I just find it kind of annoying. Because it's not like she was intended to have that kind of strength. It's just where the numbers ended up landing. But 15 health and 0 to 20 mana off the W. Here's her health before and after. 15 health, not a ton. Yes, she has very, very low base health. Again, she is very weak to someone like Fizz because her base health is really low. Obviously, she can self-heal the W. She is functionally always 200 something extra health, which I think might be part of the reason why her base health is low, because she can always add some back. But again, she has normal range championed magic resist and very, very high armor. And then, of course, the W mana cost is down a fair bit. So, yeah, going to be felt quite a bit. Nami's going to be quite a bit stronger. Seems already like a good champion, so that's going to be pretty meaningful. All right, so Senna gets more crit strike damage. So as she gets souls and she crits, she can auto attack. And this basically means, by the way, that this strictly says, hey, buying attack speed is good. Because that's really the only extra way Senna has to scale her crit damage. She already gets a bunch of raw AD. And so choosing to build the AD items that give attack speed instead of the AD items that give, whatever else, like lethality or other kinds of armor pen. Black Cleaver I think is still very, very good. It's like, well, if I basically, I get more out of a crit damage buff by building attack speed, a Kraken Slayer and whatnot, than by going a different direction. Now, I still don't think attack speed Senna is the right build, especially. So I think attack speed Senna is fine if your lane mate is trying to be a support. Like, they're playing farm Set or farm Tahm Kench, but they know their actual goal is like, hey, we're playing around Senna getting souls, and we're playing around Senna actually being a carry. Like, that play style kind of works because you're maximizing her range, because even though her actual DPS is kind of low because her base attack speed and everything, she has so much range and so many souls, so she has really high raw base AD that she could still be a decent, carry in a team fight. However, when she's laning with a Vayne or a Kaisa or Xayah or Lucian or whatever, it's like, well, it turns out that she just isn't going to get the resources or the safety to build a DPS build. And she should just build Divine Sunderer or, even a Shirelles or something, and or a lethality build more so, and not be a raw DPS champ, because she's not going to be able to do that. She should just build for supporting the team a bit more. Building a Black Cleaver is very, very good on like actual support Senna. So let's move it slightly. It also says, hey, by the way, this is going to buff Senna as the primary farmer in the bot lane, because the other change is the soul drop rate is now 10% for minions as well monsters that she kills, instead of 4.166%. Now, people are like, wow, it's more than double. This is pitiful, right? So keep in mind that, you want to be at like 60 to 80 souls something in the late game, right? You want to be, rounding up to 100. That's the goal. That's actually what you're looking for here. For reference, the drop rate of cannons she doesn't kill is 100%. The drop rate of regular minions she doesn't kill is 28%. So, okay, 28 becomes 4% is a, really big drop. 28 becomes 10% is still a really big drop. So the difference is, by the way, for every 100 CS, Senna is getting 6 more souls. So 200 CS, 12 more souls. 300 CS, which is pretty unrealistic, 18 more souls. Now, that said, 18 more souls is a lot. That is a really, really large buff if that is ever to happen. But, again, not realistic. By and large, it is going to have an effect. Like, bot lane farm Senna is, of course, going to get stronger. And even support Senna will sometimes be last hitting minions, and she'll get another soul once in a while for that. Like, that'll happen. Every 25 CS, instead of being 1 soul, is 2.5. Cool, right? Like, it's not great. That's kind of where we're headed, right? That's what we're looking at. It's not outstanding, but, it's there a little bit. All right, next up is Teemo. So Teemo's getting 3 flat damage onto the E. Great. Here you go. Here's the total on-hit damage using his base AD before and after. Okay, great. Here's the total damage of the E using the entire dot, saying it can only attack once as a poke tool and then walk away. Honestly, an ability having 280 total damage is not that absurd. Not terribly high. And this even, requires his base attack as well. So, it's not like that much damage, but, the ratio on hit's not bad. The ratio on the dot's not bad. I like Teemo. I think he's a fun champion. So, cool. A little bit more for him. Sounds good. Next up, big changes to Viego is the third one. I wouldn't call it really much of a rework, but still some meaningful changes. Attack range down from 225 to 200. I know one of the design goals for Viego was he was meant to feel different from other melee auto attackers. Like, that was a intended specialty for Viego. He's supposed to feel different, and that is, hey, I have more range than other champions. I have this double attack really frequently. Like, that kind of stuff I think is reasonable. To say, hey, look, I'm making a melee champion who's going to auto attack unlike other champions, and finding ways to do that is, I think, reasonable, right? This was done intentionally. That said, 200 is still on the high end, and it's still going to, be him doing really well. Obviously, Viego's doing really, really well in pro. He's doing fine in the jungle in solo queue. But one thing I will say, this is also something that comes from the designer, is Bruiser was meant to be an acceptable build for Viego. He was not meant to just be only squishy, Musto Kraken Slayer, Phantom Dancer, just like, hey, die all the time. They were meant to be roughly equal as builds. I forget which one was actually favored. It could have been one or the other. I don't know for sure. But like, the idea of building him Bruiser was not a surprise. This was understood and expected as he was getting designed. But, as it's turned out, I will say, I am glad these changes are happening because they're pushing away from Bruiser, which I think is the correct thing. Basically, the healing is going down by a ton, and instead, it is scaling a bunch off of attack speed. And so what it comes down to is, you heal for 8% of your target's max health, right? And then that percentage is increased by the amount of bonus AD you build, by the amount of AP you build, by the amount of attack speed you build. It's had this attack speed ratio. But we can see that the AD ratio went from 2.5 to 3%. Okay, not a ton. But the AS ratio went from 2.5 to 5. So there is a much, much higher attack speed scaling sort of function added to this ability. Now, it's worth noting, the primary pro build for Viego has been Divine Thunderer in Asterix Gauge into Wit's End, because Wit's End has AD, attack speed, and MR, all of which are useful tank stats. And more so the GA, because it turns out the flat MR and the better healing is just going to be more teamfight durability than Guardian Angel's, similar amounts of armor, but, the revive instead of, this AS ratio for the healing. But obviously, with the base healing going from 8 to 3%, that's really, 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 really meaningful. So let's start with this one. Let's start with the passive healing, okay? So here's with nothing at all. It's down by 37.5%, of course, 8 becoming 3. Yep, it's indeed 3/8. Who would have thought? But here is, assuming that we're building 10 AD per level, right, which is 10 to 180 bonus AD, which is, that's about 5 items, right? Like Divine Thunder gives about 40, Wit's End gives about 40, Blade of the Rune King gives 40, a GA gives about 40, or Death Dance, like it's about those numbers. It's like, 4 to 5 items level 18. That's about how it's going to go, right? Like that's reasonably accurate. So, okay, cool. So our AD ratio indeed got buffed. How's it look? Well, still not great, right? If we're just building Bruiser Mythics, and again, we're not getting Wit's End yet. If we're just getting AD, it's like, well, it gets closer, but it's still not there. Instead of being, 1/3 as bad, it's, 2/3 as bad. It's less terrible, right? But, we're not there yet. We haven't made it up. It's like, well, how much bonus AS do I have to get? And as far as I can tell, by the way, this does not count attack speed from leveling up, okay? This is attack speed from items only, much like Xayah E-Evolve. Actually, I take that back. Xayah E-Evolve is from leveling up. I take that back. However, much like, I believe, attack speed ratios on things like Jhin and other stuff. I'm not sure. Obviously, there's a little bit of inconsistency. It's up to the designer's tastes. I get that, whatever. But this is, by the way, as far as I can tell, only bonus attack speed from leveling up, unless the work was done incorrectly. But based on like the data table I saw from the playtest team or the game analysis team, like this is items and runes only. So here's how much bonus attack speed you need in order to meet up. And obviously, again, it's not going to happen here. It's not going to happen here. Like, it's going to be a while, right? This is definitively weaker in the early game. There's like no doubt to this whatsoever. This is definitively weaker in the early game. But in the late game, it's like, well, if I can go Kraken Slayer, if I can go Berserker's Greaves, I'm going to buy a Wit's End. If I Blade of the Rune King, right? Like, if his build is Blade of the Rune King and Wit's End and Kraken Slayer, it's like, that's going to get you there, basically. And none of those have raw HP on them, right? Like, I don't think, aside from Triforce, there are no items with health and attack speed on them, which to me is fine. I mean, I guess you could say Shield Bow. I think it's actually an okay option for him as well, because technically the Mythic has his health and the shield is, the shield. And there might be one that I'm not thinking of, obviously, but I think that's completely fine. I guess Stridebreaker is another one. Stridebreaker has health and attack speed, so there's actually several, but you can't stack a lot of these. It's a lot of them are mythics. In fact, they're pretty much all mythics, and that's fine. It's like, cool. If you're going to make the rest of this up, the rest of healing up, and heal as much before, basically what it comes down to, I guess I'll rephrase this. If you are already building crit Viego, you're not going to feel this nerf nearly as badly. If you're building Bruiser Viego, you are being nerfed here. A couple final changes. The crit damage multi on Q is going up. It's now going to crit better than real crit. You can see Viego in his E a bit more easily. I actually kind of am a fan of this one. This is a really, really, really short range 400. And even though you know where he's going, he's in that path, He's got so much movement speed that like you can never actually follow him, and he gets to surprise you pretty reliably. So okay, you can find it a little bit easier, sure, whatever. Heartbreaker slows down by half. I'm actually really glad that this ult that's meant to be an execute. This is actually it's interesting. This is something that was posted like back in like 09 or 2010 or something. I think this was Zilius talking about it. Where he's saying that like, hey, you want your use case for abilities to be obvious. Like it's weird to have a big nuke with a big slow attached because you're like, do I do it first for the slow or do I do it at the end for the nuke? And especially when it's a like a missing health damage thing, it's like, oh, okay, well, I either execute or I slow them and fight them. And it's like, I understand like wanting a versatile tool, and I get that, and that makes some degree of sense, but also it's an execute. It shouldn't also be some of the best CC in the game, probably, right? Because it's also a knockback. It's also a 90% slow for 0.5 seconds, which is like pretty meaningful. It also resets every fight, so he actually has like 2 seconds of not hard CC, but 2 seconds of heavy slowing in every fight. It's like, you've got a stun, dude. Like, just lay out. So like, I'm glad this change is happening. Like, I think this was a bit vestigial to have such a good slow. I know it's only half second, but still, like, that's still a good slow on an execute. So happy to see that. Bug fixes and stuff, cool stuff. Okay, great. Next up is Xayah, and these look pretty big. Xayah is interesting in that she has kind of a weird spell. Because, right, her Q casts a spell that itself throws 2 daggers out. Because as you'll notice, she can move by the time the second dagger's going. Right? She casts a spell, and then that spell like kind of lingers in the air and actually throws the daggers out. That's actually how it works, like under the hood and actually just mechanically. And so there's actually, I think, like a fair bit of effort required to update all of this. Because one thing that hurts Xayah quite a bit is like, well, 0.25 seconds is kind of a long time to cast a spell as a marksman when you have an attack speed steroid in the kit. It's one of the things that actually works pretty well with Caitlyn with her Q is like her base attack speed ratio is really low. And the way that her base stats work, she's not really incentivized to build that much attack speed. And so she kind of gets to get away with channeling the Q, for things like, well, they ate a trap, it's always going to do full damage. Also, the thing is like 500 damage in the first place. Like, it's pretty meaningful stuff. It's just so it's tuned so aggressively that it makes sense for Caitlyn to sometimes stop and cast Q. It's a little bit harder for Xayah, where the damage just isn't really that high. It can't crit, and it takes her kind of a while to cast it. So off we go. For example, by the way, Tristana E already scales with attack speed. The 215 bonus attack speed, by the way, as far as I can tell, this counts her W and actually her base stats. Like I said, I think it's been inconsistent, but whatever. So it's not that hard to get all the way to a 0.1 cast time. Just FYI. Final buff is Featherstorm getting even more flat damage. I mean, we have had a lot of Featherstorm damage buffs over and over and over and over again. Now we're 2 to 400. So here you go. Obviously much bigger in the early game. And then, not that meaningful at level 16 plus, but whatever. I'm not sure where I stand. I do, by the way, I want to say I really like clean numbers. So it goes from, triple damage to double damage. I'm not sure which of those I like more, just like conceptually as a player. In general, I have noticed that ults that triple in damage tend to remain relevant as damage tools. For example, Fiddlestick's Crowstorm almost triples in damage. I think it's like 125, 225, 325, so it nearly triples in damage. It's more than double, right? By max rank. And that tends to make Crowstorm always feel good, right? It allows him to remain as a mage where his R matters. And it's per second, of course. It's less required for marksman, obviously. But I really, really do think it's important that auto attack marksmen have very powerful ultimates. I think it's actually really, really important that they have a fallback pattern in case they get behind, because they scale so much off of gold that having something that still worked for them is pretty valuable. That said, I know we just had the thing with Lucian, where Lucian doesn't get like basically any scaling off his ultimate, and yeah. But I will say, at least with Lucian, it has a total AD ratio attached. I'm also, by the way, a really big fan of ults having total AD ratios. If they scale off AD at all, having total AD ratios. I know Wukong's does, for example, because it smooths the curve, which I think is valuable. I'm not sure. It's a random thought. I know we're already an hour into this video. My instinct is I really like ultimates scaling so that a level 10 ultimate is better than level 6 ultimate, but it still gets better at level 11 in some, meaningful way. I'm generally a fan of total AD ratios, kind of smoothing out abilities. I think that's generally a good thing. But I think there's arguments against that. And it could even be done inconsistently in case you have like problems with lane assignments and stuff like that. For example, Lucian. Next up, Zed. I didn't really do numbers in these, but basically 0.1 AD ratio higher on the Q, 0.15 lower on the E. So, okay, land your skill shots. And then R 0 to 20 longer on the cooldown. This one I did do. Here you go. Not a huge problem there. I mean, 60 is absurdly short, and 80 is still short. It's not going to be a big problem for him. All right, so Divine Thunder. I'm a big fan of this buff, or sorry, this nerf, I should say. Basically saying, okay, look, nerf the generic power, make Triforce and, Gordwinker and such more competitive across from it. And I mean, this is the correct buff, though, or the correct nerf. I keep saying buff. It's the correct nerf because you want the unique passive to be the unique thing that's special about it. The max health spell blade, the healing attached. And I did some numbers, actually, but we'll do the data, the gold efficiency real quick, and then we'll do the rest of it. So, still efficiently, right? This is, by the way, just doing 1.5x Spellblade. Not even the percent max health stuff, just 1.5x. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Right, 32% efficient from that. Obviously, a little bit of armor pen is not bad. The item is very efficient to the tune of, 122%, before even counting the healing. I didn't even put the healing in, by the way. And then here, we nerf by 5 AD. Still pretty efficient to the tune of 117%. 8% per mythic passive. Okay, whatever. So obviously still a very good item. Still clearly worth buying. Whatever. So I read some very brief numbers, and I just picked some AD out of a hat and some health out of a hat as just example targets. As far as I can tell, against basically what it comes down to is in the early game, your Divine Slender is mostly doing the 1.5x base AD. For the first maybe 9-10 levels for most champions, Divine Slender is actually just doing 1.5x base AD. You're not getting max health damage yet. Obviously, as they buy health, it eventually happens. As people level up, it eventually happens. But keep in mind, right, AD roughly doubles to triples across levels. You spawn at 50, 60 attack damage, and you end at 100, 120. Right, that's roughly accurate for most champions. So it roughly doubles across the game. Health, by comparison, triples to quadruples. Right, 500 something to 2,000 something. That's really frequent. Right, that's a common health ratio. Even 600 to 2,000 is still more than triple. Right, more than what happens to champions base AD. Right, no one goes from 50 to 150. Which means that eventually over time, Divine Slender moves toward being percent health damage and starts at being base AD. That's just how that kind of works. Now with Trinity Force, right? Trinity Force is double your base AD as a comparison point. Trinity Force doubles your base AD. So that takes even longer. It's level 14 or 15 when they have 1700 max health. That's when, for a lot of champions, Divine Slender's max health is more damage per Spellblade than Triforce 2x base AD. Now that said, it depends on the champion, right? Depends what your base AD is, depends on what champions you're facing against, obviously, whatnot. But also it's worth pointing out, as we kind of just talk about theoretics here, without visual aids, Triforce has the base AD increase, the 30% base AD increase from landing stuff, from threefold strikes. And that's going to push that math even farther down. Realistically, Triforce does tend to out-damage Divine Thunder for a large portion of the game. First of all, when you first buy it. Because in neither case, when you buy these items, is the percent health damage actually being used. So Triforce is just is more damage when you first buy the item. It's just actually a better power spec damage-wise. That's just kind of true. And the healing, I believe, doesn't make up for it either. I think the healing is still, it's not 1/3 of the Spellblade damage, which means if you do 1/3 more damage, okay, well, the health difference is still greater for Triforce. That's before the everything else stacks up. So, in general, again, the math works out in a lot of cases that Triforce is more damage, unless you really are against a health stacker or you really, really do value the healing, then it goes towards Divine Thunder. But again, it makes this nerf make sense because you do want to preserve the intent behind the items. Divine Thunder is a lot about the Sheen proc and the fact that it's good against tanks, and Triforce is much more about, raw AD and auto attacks and all that kind of stuff. All right, so next up is Hullbreaker, getting 100 health attached. Okay, pretty small buff here. Here you go. Was gold inefficient, still is roughly. Health regen could easily be an overpriced stat, but it's not that expensive regardless. The lowest armor MR is 20 armor and Hematic Resist. I just said, look, let's just add the value of 20 armor and 20 MR. That's the pretend value of the item. You're obviously not going to get value out of both at the same time in most cases, but you're also not only getting 20 in most cases. So choosing that as an example number, okay, great. But yeah, a bit more efficient. Okay, cool. less gankable, right? Less dying. Next up is Serpent's Fang. Serpent's Fang is losing 6 lethality. It has been getting bought really heavily. It is a really cheap way to get a lot of AD and lethality. That said, it was just gold efficient stats that then also gave you Shield Reaver. This depends on, of course, how much you value lethality. My internal metric from a while back was 25 gold per lethality. Riot seems to consider it to be worth 42. Obviously, using Serrated Dirk as your actual starting point is troll, but the way they consider items for efficiency is 42. I'm just going to say 40 because I like clean numbers and I want to walk back Riot's idea slightly. Doesn't mean I'm right, just means it's the numbers I'm using. Just to be clear about that. But yeah, so if it's 40 gold per lethality, the item was indeed gold efficient before Shield Reaver, which to be fair, I'm just taking this to mean Grievous Wounds, by the way. I'm literally just saying, well, what does it cost to buy Grievous Wounds? Okay, well, here's Shield Reaver. Which in that case, right, it means Shield Reaver was... I mean, realistically, this is appropriate gold efficiency. The actual design target for legendaries in League of Legends is 110% gold efficiency. That's actually where they're aiming. Just by the way, right? That's what they look for in legendaries to make completing items worthwhile. That's just the number. By the way, there you go. You have that number for you. For me, it's 125%. By the way, doesn't always remain true. Like sometimes, you kind of value things at different numbers, whatever. Sometimes items just like, the synergies aren't quite what you think they are, whatever. But now they're going to, okay, well, you're obviously buying it to buy it. And indeed, the efficiency, if it's just Grievous Wounds, is, yeah, it's still over 100% gold efficient. If you think it's slightly better than Grievous Wounds, and it probably is, because keep in mind, if you Shield Reaver someone, and then they get shielded, that shield is cut appropriately. If someone is shielded, and then you hit them, that shield is still cut by you. So it's more applicable than Grievous Wounds compared to the fact of like, well, I just got healed and then I hit you, too late, does nothing, right? The fact that you can undo a precast shield is obviously more valuable. So hey, maybe it's Grievous times 2. Maybe it's twice as good. Oh, well, voila, look, efficiency, right? Again, gold efficiency is not the end all be all of item analysis. It's just an easy thing to put down on paper and look at. Next up, Wit's End. Wit's End is getting my favorite change to items, which is it scales from level 9 onwards. I'm a very, very big fan of this for 3,000 gold items where they are, meant to be completed into the mid game or, just beyond the first 3 levels, because realistically, 15 to 80 linear scaling, this number is never usable. If they wanted to, make this item not an absurd power spike, they'd have to say 0 to 80, and even then, it would probably be really awkward and probably not line up where they wanted it to go. Because even if it's 0 to 80, you are still getting 40 damage on hit by level 10. It's like, well, our hands are tied. Negative 20 to 80, that's stupid, right? So you lose out on tuning levers unless you say, let's start at something else. So look, if you manage to buy it before level 9, it's 15 flat damage. Okay. Sure, that's fine. 15 flat damage, no big deal. Why not? But then from level 9 onwards, it's 25 and about 10 per rank. Now, I want to point out, by the way, that if this was... I think if it was 26, it would be a clean, I think, plus 9 per level. Something like that, or it would be like a clean 11 or something like that. I forget exactly, but if they bump theirs by very, very little bit, they could have had non-decimals. It's not important. No one cares. It gets rounded off in the tooltip anyway, so it doesn't matter at all. But just saying. But yeah, basically, if you buy the item at level 9, it goes from 45 on hit damage to 25 on hit damage. That is a very, very, very big difference, right? First item Wit's End gets nerfed quite severely. Worth noting, by the way, that if you like attack damage, MR, and attack speed, yeah. This item is instantly gold efficient and really close to that 110% mark. And then, unsurprisingly, right, on hit damage, quite good, yeah. So, indeed, Wit's End is numerically quite overtuned. Now, that said, there's a real argument that most people cannot use attack speed and MR very well. I think this is generally true, right? If you buy this on Darius, how often are you using attack speed and on hit damage? To a certain degree, those numbers kind of need to be a bit overtuned because, let's compare the, similar value, right? So, okay, I got 40% attack damage, which is worth 1,000 gold. For 1,000 gold, I could have also gotten, 30 AD. If I'm Nocturne, or Jarvan, or Darius, or even probably Irelia, I'd probably still rather have 30 AD so that all my spells with their AD ratios deal more damage. No, maybe Irelia is a bit of a difference, sure, but like in most cases, I'd probably just rather have the raw AD. Attack speed is priced for, generally speaking, ranged auto attackers. Like that's really where it's kind of priced. And for ranged auto attackers, it's hard to use 50 MR. Now, certainly it can make sense, right? I'm playing Ashe, and we are against Syndra or Karthus or Fizz. Oh, Wits End seems good. And it is, right? And Ashe gets full value out of, Frey and the attack speed, and, literally every stat here, of course. The primary Akshan build in mid lane, when you're against AP, so actually checked this. I went and looked at Wits End builds for mid laners, and so I looked at Akshan, I looked at Lucian, and I looked at Tristana. So if you look at genericized data, Akshan's highest win rate first item is indeed Wits End. But I looked at his matchups against, LeBlanc, Syndra, Ekko, like the common AP mids. Wits End is in fact his best first item. Against Yasuo, against, AD champions, like the common AD picks, it is not his best first item. It turns out that when you can't use 90 gold worth of MR, or 900 gold worth of MR, it is no longer as good as a Kraken Slayer, right? Or a shield bow. No big surprise there, but it's true. I looked at it for Lucian and Tristana, and interestingly, those champions actually didn't get. It was not. It was statistically indistinguishable or worse than their more typical first item options. That turns out that Tristana and Lucian don't care as much about attack speed or on hit damage because it's more about the Hail of Blades explosive charge trade, or Lucian being more about his spells. And that Wits End, even in matchups against LeBlanc and Syndra and whatnot, Wits End was still not the right call for them. It was okay, but it wasn't optimal. According to data, according to solo queue results. Which means you really do need a lot of value out of the MR in the Akshan against non-AP threats. And you really do need the attack speed to matter in the Lucian against everything case, right? So even though this item is, again, very, 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 very gold efficient, it is, in fact, hard to find situations where every one of these stats matters. And also the 20 randomly move speed on hit feels kind of weird. I feel like this item shouldn't build out a Hearthbound Axe, but instead build out a recurve bow, but whatever. Anyway, that is all to say that, once again, you can't just use gold efficiency as the primary metric. But that said, Wits End still definitely has its home. And it is, again, substantially nerfed if you buy it first. But, comparatively far less nerfed if you buy it later on. Okay. Next up, a revert to Youmuu's Ghost Blade. It's at a 3,000 gold, it's 2,900 gold. And it goes back to Warhammer Serrated Dirk. 5 less AD, 15 more haste. That is generally a better item, right? 5 AD, 15 haste is a good trade, and 100 gold cheaper. Oh yeah, get me in there. Now, of note, it is worth mentioning, and by the way, I want to point out that Serpent's Fang, it was basically the exact same stat profile as Youmuu's, right? It's like, oh, yeah, okay, Youmuu's has move speed, and that's really, really good, but like I can just buy Serpent's Fang and I can save 400 gold for 5 AD, which is worth it. And if I'm ever getting any shield value, it's obviously just better, and it's just like the better offensive item, right? It's like, oh, well, I guess it's just the better item. So now you can compare Serpent's Fang to Youmuu's, and it's like, okay, well, for 300 gold, I get 15 haste and some move speed, and you get Shield Reaver. This feels like much, like a pretty... Oh, sorry. I get 6 lethality, 15 haste, and move speed, and you get Shield Reaver and 300 gold. It's like, okay. But I have to want Shield Reaver, right? But if you do, then it's good. So, okay, this seems okay. Anyway, yeah, Youmuu's very efficient. Obviously, 20% move speed is not going to be on all the time. I'm counting out of combat move speed, by the way, as half price regular move speed. So as just a passive item, I want to point out that the item did not meet 110 before, but meets 110 now. It's 112 now. It's quite good. It's 112% gold efficient with an active on top. This is definitely a very, very, very good item. Also note that I have also my own metric for what ability haste costs. And it's, we can just look at it. 25, yeah. Riot thinks it's 33.6, but that's a little fraudulent. Basically, they like, because what Riot did, by the way, in the preseason is they took all the items and they just turned CDR into haste and said it's the new item now. And one of the designers, like, made a spreadsheet about like, hey, here's what we're gonna price these stats at, and said, well, here's what 20% CDR cost. Here's how to get 20% CDR through ability haste. And it takes us this much ability haste. So if it's going to cost the same amount to get 20% shorter cooldowns, then, here's how much, we have to price haste at to be, fair. And it's like, they didn't really do that. They didn't really change the prices on things. So we just, it's priced differently. It's whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. But yeah, Youmuu's is going to be a quite strong item. It's going to look pretty good. I mean, this is definitely just a buff, right? I mean, this is obviously a nerf, but yeah, this is a buff. And we get one more thing, which is a change to Fleet Footwork. So Fleet Footwork, melee, and by the way, against champions, melee and ranged are identical, but here's the amount of healing Fleet Footwork gives. Worth noting, the AD ratio is up. Here, we can just kind of paste them over here. Let's, change our background color. I think we're here. There you go. Great. So yeah, the AD ratio is 1.33x. The AP ratio is 1.5x. So hey, by the way, the champion damage is, and really it's, the base damage is the larger buff. The ratios weren't buffed by nearly as much as the base damage was, even in the very, very late game when you build a bunch of items. It's, it's going to keep trending down as you buy items. But okay. As a melee champ, cool, you do more healing. As a melee champ, though, you get a lot less against minions. It's been cut from 100% to 20%. And so, yep, if you're going to play Kassadin or Akali or whatever and just survive the lane by autoing a minion for 3, 6, 9, 13, right? Like, it scales super hard really fast. It's like, well, nope, it's going to be a lot less. You're not going to heal for nearly as much, so no, you're not going to sustain through minions. It's like, okay, cool. Big sustain nerf to melee champions. For ranged, of course, again, exact same changes here on the left-hand side. The champion damage is the champion healing is no different. But again, pretty meaningful numbers. What's kind of interesting is, of course, Fleet Footwork gives you movement speed, and it works against minions, both of which are really relevant pieces of information. Right, so it gives you move speed. It works against minions, but the amount of actual numbers that change hands in champion combat is definitely far, far lower than something like Aerie, which has a similar cooldown. But again, Fleet works against minions, so can't really hate too much. That said, it gets nerfed from being 20% on minions to 10% on minions, but of course the early game buff was really big, so technically in the really, really early game, it's slightly better on marksman. And any ranged champion who's taking it, it is slightly weaker against minions in the late game. And keep in mind, again, the AD ratio buff is only 1.33. The AP ratio buff is only 1.5. So this actually gets worse and worse against minions in the late game. It gets below 80% because it trends toward, 67% or 75%. This is still going to be buffed. Again, not buffed by quite as much, again, because of the ratios in actuality, but, not a huge problem, I don't think. Definitely better against champions. Pretty power neutral against minions for ranged, and definitely nerfed against minions for melee. So overall, power neutral-ish for melee, probably power positive for ranged, which was the design intent in the first place, and there it is. That's pretty much it. So let's scroll up to the top again. All right, League of Legends patch 11.17 rundown TLDR. Bunch of changes going on. Some of them are kind of soft scale reworks. Akshan's best build was Emax first. That is going to nerf pretty substantially. It'll take 267 AD to buff this at rank 5. That'll take a while, but it is theoretically possible at full build. Otherwise, basically just a strict nerf to Akshan. Especially if you're going to max E first. Amumu is getting a small scale rework. He now has 2 bandage tosses, and you probably max his ability last now. W gets 4 flat DPS, exchange for eventually 0.4% max health damage at max rank of the ability, but you get the 4 flat damage no matter what rank it is. Ultimate stun duration is down by 0.25 seconds, and base stat growth is down a little bit as well. The goal being to get Amumu to a much flatter win rate by elo, because right now he is very skewed towards bronze and very bad in, plat, diamond plus. Ekko is a popular but weak jungler and a reasonably popular and very strong mid laner, so they're just buffing the jungle damage because if he's popular there, why not let him be good there? Off they go. Evelynn, small buff to her ult cooldown. Should be fine. Gangplank getting a lot of early nerfs. Much less movement through the passive. The parlay Q damage is down because it now counts as a range basic attack. It means it does not get full interaction of Grasp of the Undying. Gets 60% of the damage, 60% of the healing, 60% of the max health gained. This ends up being about 8% less damage on the Q. Ends up being around a 12 health difference. Or more like a 15 health difference, counting his healing and his damage dealt. It's a very, 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 very big deal. That said, Powder Keg now benefits more from crit damage or crit strike chance in general. Actually, probably just crit damage in general specifically, but whatever. And gets way more barrels. So even though the recharge time is getting slower, basically what this means is that max rank, your first 7 barrels all come in faster. Barrel number 8 is equivalent. Otherwise, it's just better. So, buffs. I guess technically barrels 1, 2, and 3 are the same, but barrels 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all better. 8 is identical, and then 9 is worse. You're going to be fine. Lane Graves has been OP, so 20 mana onto the queue to drop it down slightly. Lane Graves is probably still going to be very, very strong. You're really getting a bit less healing, 4% over total attack damage on the Blade Surge. It's actually not that big of a deal. Even if you were going to Q last hit every single minion in the wave, you're still only losing about maybe 12% or so of your total regen, maybe 15% of your total regen in lane before things like Doran Shield. So not that huge of a nerf, but matters a little bit. Kayn, this passive works on all of his damage as long as he can trigger it. It works on his Q, his W, his everything, not just his auto attack. So pretty meaningful damage drop to Blue Kayn. Not a gigantic deal, but you're going to feel this to almost the tune of 10% damage lost, but a bit less than that because MR affects this as well. Leona losing a bit of durability, around 3% with their W on. Not a huge deal, but it's going to matter some. Lissandra, 2 base AD, 5 mana cost off Q, should be in a good spot. Lucian getting a pretty large set of changes, so 2 base AD is down. The ult no longer scales number of shots. Instead, it's multiplied by crit chance, which of course you can. Obviously, 100% crit chance is, you can double 22 to 44, and it's more shots, so no duh. But it requires some crit chance to make this up. But also the base damage per shot is down by not quite a quarter because the total AD ratio still exists. The other change in compensation for this is, hey, if you are buffed by an ally, basically if it triggers Aerie or you use your W, it counts. Every time you are buffed, your next 2 basic attacks deal a bunch of bonus damage, and more than makes up for the base damage here. There are probably going to be some really good shenanigans for, maybe 2 Bard Shrines, and then Lucian jumps in and lands 4 auto attacks. Like, there's going to be some stuff out there where you're going to have some really, really good Lucian bullying, because this is a lot of damage. It is going to be a lot of damage. This is meaningful. Keep that in mind. Other thing of note is the math on the ultimate. We'll actually go ahead and provide that for everyone. So the thing you have to look at is basically this. This is the math all worked out for you. It's pretty close. If you are building crit on this champion, your ult is doing about the same damage. If you are not building crit on this champion, you are hurting yourself severely. Keep in mind that this crit chance could just be the percentage of damage you need to get back somehow. And it's rough, right? You're losing... you're almost half damage at rank 3 without crit chance. But if you're building him pretty conventionally, you're really close. So crit Lucian is more or less untouched. Lethality Lucian is hurt quite a bit. Nami gets 15 health and 0 to 20 mana off of her W. She's already pretty strong, so should be in a really, really good spot post-patch. Senna gets a bit more crit damage and gets more souls from any she kills. This is not a massive deal. Keep in mind, every 100 CS goes from dropping 4 souls to dropping 10 souls. That's not a huge difference. I mean, 6 souls still matters, to be clear. But, if you consider the average Senna game where your farming has, maybe 200 CS, 12 souls is not bad. But, it's not earth-shattering. It's 8 AD and halfway to a range buff. That's not bad, but it's not absurd. Teemo gets 3 flat on hit damage on his E. Cool beans. Viego gets a bunch of changes. Lower attack range. Increased detection radius on his E. Half slow duration on his R. A crit chance damage buff to his Q, which is going to be pretty meaningful. But the big change is his healing upon possession goes from 8% of their max health to 3% of their max health, but scales twice as well from attack speed. So the basic data table for this one is this. Assuming you're building, standard AD items and getting 10 attack damage per level, roughly, in items, you're going to need to equalize, to the tune of 150, 140 something bonus attack speed by pretty late into the game. So it is definitely a nerf early on because there's no way you can kind of get kind of attack speed early game. But yeah, your build needs to have, Kraken Slayer, Ruin King, Wit's End, all that kind of stuff to get there. It's going to take a bit. So, and if you're building full Bruiser, you're just getting a lot less healing for sure because the attack speed ratio is now the most aggressive of all the ratios. Next up, Xayah. Her Q cast time now scales down with attack speed, which should feel really good. R damage up by quite a bit in the early to mid game. Should be pretty good there as well. Zed, slight ratios changed, up on Q, down on E, 0 to 20 added to the R. Small nerfs here, but I think he's going to be fine. Divine Thunder loses 5 AD. Hullbreaker gets 100 health. And Serpent's Fang loses 6 lethality, all of which, obviously this is not getting bought very much. It's getting a little bit overpurchased. That said, there are plenty of options right now. People should go other places than Divine Thunderer. They just kind of aren't, so this will help kind of change player perception and get the behavior to go to the right place. Serpent's Fang, 6 lethality down. Obviously getting rushed by a lot of assassins for no reason, but I'm glad the nerf was lethality and not raw AD, because, it's good to allow someone like Kaisa or Ashe or whoever just to buy this to get Shield Reaver because it's useful. Wit's End, basically the on-hit damage goes from around 45 at level 9 to 25 at level 9. It's a very, very big nerf to first item Wit's End. Somewhat deservedly so. Okay, fine. Yuma's Ghostblade, very much more efficient. 5 AD for 15 lethality on 100 gold is a trade everyone should be willing to make. It's an outstanding trade. Feels good. Fleet Footwork, basically substantially up in healing to the tune of 3 to 1.7x against champions. For ranged champs against minions is not that much worse because, the minion cut is only half. That's not that bad. For melee champions, it's a really, really, really big hit. So generally going to be a buff for ranged champions or marksmen. Generally going to be equal to maybe a nerf for melee. And, it means that champs with weak laning phases don't get to bypass weak laning phases with just building fleet and just healing for a ton of minions. All right, that's the patch. It's a long one. Hour and a half. We are done. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.